Hi, my name is Emma and let's talk spooky stuff. So I'm back finally with my best of the 80s list. If you haven't seen one of these lists before, I've done 2010s, I've done 2000s, I've done 90s, and now we're finally doing 80s. I pick a personal favorite and a hidden gem from each year. Please keep in mind these are just my personal favorites, and although I love so many more films from each year, I'm choosing only my absolute favorite. In the 90s one, people went off in the comments because I didn't mention Candyman. I love Candyman, but for me, Dead Alive or Brain Dead is one of my favorite films ever, and I just like it more. It doesn't mean that Candyman isn't an amazing film, it just means my personal favorite was the other film. So I'm not going through and I'm not snubbing anything, I'm just picking my favorite film from each year. Sometimes I do cheat and pick a couple because I like them just as much as each other, but I only do that when I like the films the same. Okay, now we got that cleared, I'm very excited for the 80s. I didn't think I was a really cheesy 80s type person, but looking at this list, it turns out I do like a little bit of 80s cheese. So I'm really excited to bring it to you, but do keep in mind with the underrated gems of the 80s, obviously they're going to be more well known than, you know, the 2010s or 2000s because they've been out for so long. So they might be underrated to some people, they might not be to others, but hopefully this serves as a good list. Please get your pen and paper ready because we're about to start my personal favorite of 1980. It's The Shining. Duh! My apologies to Stephen King, but I do firmly believe that the 1980s Kubrick adaptation of The Shining is one of the greatest horror films ever made. The film is about a family that move into an isolated hotel with a violent past. This is one of the most iconic films ever made, known for its tension, chilling atmosphere, and unique visuals. The Shining is not only just my personal favorite from the 1980s, but I think it's a lot of people's favorite horror movie in general. For the underrated gem for this year, I picked a film that I recently watched that I was very impressed by, and I'm so sorry it took me so long to watch it. It's Ken Russell's Altered States. Ken Russell directs this trippy ride into the mind and beyond. William Hurt is Eddie, an eccentric Harvard scientist that conducts a series of experiments on himself in an isolated chamber to try and prove that he can physically alter his state of being. Super trippy, but I think that Ken Russell's directing style really suits this kind of film. It is an intense ride and it's actually got a lot of emotion in it, so I really enjoyed that one. 1981 was a great year for horror films, and the first one I have to mention is An American Werewolf in London. This is one of my favorite films of the 80s and one of the best werewolf films ever made. In this one, two Americans are attacked by a werewolf while on holiday in England. There are so many amazing elements in this film, from the morphing scenes to the story of friendship and love. It's surprisingly deep and truly has stood the test of time. But don't worry, I have cheated here because there is one film that I love equally as much as An American Werewolf in London, and that is Evil Dead. It wouldn't be the 80s without Bruce Campbell in his iconic role as Ash, a man with all the odds stacked against him and some kick-ass one-liners. In this one, Ash and his friends take a trip to a cabin in the woods where they accidentally unleash pure evil. Like everyone else, I love this film, but when I watched it as a kid, I was truly terrified by it, especially the possession scenes, but it wouldn't be a Spookyastronauts video without some disturbing stuff. My underrated gem for this year is Possession. This is a psychological horror drama. It's a strange film about a woman who exhibits disturbing behavior after asking her husband for a divorce. This one was shot in Germany and is dark and sinister. But next we're going to 1982, and my favorite film of this year is all cheese and very strange. It is Basket Case. This one is one of my true guilty pleasures. It's a strange, cheesy, and surprisingly sad film, which I don't think was intended. The film follows a man who carries around his Siamese twin in a basket. The two aim to track down the doctor who separated them at birth. I love that film so much, but a film I love equally as much, and I promise I'm not doing this for every single year, but it has to be said. The Thing. This was dubbed by horror fans as one of the greatest horror remakes of all time, but it's known to be more of a faithful adaptation to the original novella Who Goes There. In the John Carpenter version, a research team in Antarctica are hunted by a shape-shifting alien that takes the appearance of its victims. It's a stirring movie with a brilliant performance by Kurt Russell. And my underrated gem of this year has to be a giallo film that I love, that most people love. It is Tenebrae. Sleepaway. This classic is an underrated gem about a writer who is stalked by a serial killer. Things are about to get a little bit surreal, so let's go down the rabbit hole. My favorite from 1983 is Videodrome. Directed by David Cronenberg, this horror sci-fi thriller starring James Wood and Debbie Harry is about a TV programmer whose life spins out of control when he discovers a strange way of programming called Videodrome. This one is not easy to describe. It has to be seen to be believed. Just like my next one, which is the underrated gem from this year, and that is Sleepaway Camp. This film is now known as a cult classic, but it wasn't when it was first released. Sleepaway Camp follows Angela, who is sent to live with her aunt after a tragic accident. As a young teen, Angela is sent off to camp where she must attempt to fit in. But as soon as she arrives, strange acts of violence begin. Of course, this one is quite well known. As I said, it's a cult classic. I have done a breakdown on that scene in this film if you want to check it out. And I just wanted to put it in here because I do think it's underrated. From a general audience perspective, I think a lot of people who aren't into horror probably haven't seen this one. But let's move on to 1984, and before we get into the main one, you know what I'm gonna say. I'm gonna surprise you and talk about another film that I like just as much as our friend Freddy, and that is The Children of the Corn. I feel like I'm one of the only people who love this film. It is a tad strange and not very well polished, but Isaac and Malachi have to be some of the creepiest kids in horror. The film is based around a Stephen King story about a young couple that are trapped by a dangerous cult of children that believe that everyone over the age of 18 must be killed. Come on, Children of the Corn deserve some respect. Of course, the special effects are a little bit corny. Wow, that was not intended. But I do think it has a lot of heart and it's just so strange. I love it, but a film I love just as much as that, and I'm sure you all are screaming it at home, is A Nightmare on Elm Street. Wes Craven wrote and directed this classic teen horror slasher about a murderous spirit that seeks revenge by haunting the dreams of teenagers whose parents were responsible for his death. What can I say? Freddy is just iconic. He is the definition of an icon. But I want to say I would throw another movie into this mix, but I don't think it is classified as horror. I know there's a big debate about it, but Ghostbusters is one of my favorite films of all time. I've watched it about 100 times, but I just want to say if it was categorized as a horror, it would be in here. But the list I'm using to standardize it, it is not a horror. That's a debate for another day. I don't want to have it right now, but my underrated gem for this year, it's definitely a horror. It is The Toxic Avenger. I bet you wouldn't have picked it. I actually love this film. It's a silly comedy horror about a geeky boy who collides with toxic waste and he becomes the Toxic Avenger, an unlikely hero bringing evildoers to their knees. It's just some silly fun and I think we all need that right now. 1985, this is another easy one for me. It's RE-ANIMATOR. Loosely based on a H.P. Lovecraft story, this offbeat horror is about an odd medical student that experiments with the reanimation of dead tissue. The film stars Jeffrey Combs, Bruce Abbott, and Barbara Crampton. Fun fact for this film, the special effects department went through 24 gallons of fake blood. What I'm trying to say is the practical effects are amazing. But speaking of practical effects, let's talk about the stuff. Larry Cohen's The Stuff takes my spot for underrated gem of this year. This sci-fi horror comedy is a strange ride about a mysterious goo that is bottled up and marketed as dessert. It makes its way into people's homes, changing them forever. The movie is plain goofy, but a ride you won't soon forget. 1986 brought another amazing remake, and that is The Fly. The David Cronenberg remake of the 1950s classic is based on a short story of the same name. This one stars Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis. It's about an eccentric scientist whose experiment ends in a disaster, causing him to slowly turn into a fly-like creature. And my underrated gem for this year is Night of the Creeps. This is usually not my kind of horror, but I watched it a couple years ago and I was really impressed. This sci-fi horror comedy is about killer slug-like aliens that crash to Earth, causing an unlikely group of teenagers to fight back. Believe it or not, we're already at 1987 and my favorite film for this year, hands down, is Hellraiser. This British supernatural horror film is written and directed by Clive Barker, and this one is a true nightmare. It's about a supernatural puzzle box that summons a gang of other dimensional demons known as Cenobites. Obviously, Hellraiser turned into a huge franchise, but the original film is just so amazing. Jesus wept. And for my underrated gem, long before Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, Peter Jackson made some really wacky films, one being Bad Taste, a low-budget New Zealand film about a small town dealing with an alien infestation. The film is very low budget and very rough. In fact, the film was shot on weekends during a 4-year period, and Peter Jackson used his friends as the lead roles. 1988, I got some more cheese for ya. I am a huge fan of Killer Clowns from Outer Space. This is my favorite cheese film of all time. The film is exactly what the title states. Clown-like aliens attacking a small town and turning their victims into strange cocoons to harvest. It is wacky and it's just visually pleasing. The clowns are kooky, bright, and one of my favorite costume designs for a villain. I think that the 80s is the best year for stylized villains. Things like Freddy Krueger, obviously Friday the 13th is in there, but it's not one of my favorites. Killer Clowns, the Cenobites, like they are badass horror villains, and I love them so much. I was really lucky. I went to Halloween Horror Nights in Hollywood and I saw the Killer Clowns from the Outer Space haunt house, and it was amazing. I actually have a video for you guys that I was going to release closer to the date, hopefully if Halloween Horror Nights comes up this year, about my experience, just to see if you want to buy certain tickets. But I just want to say that was the coolest experience, being a big fan of Killer Clowns from Outer Space and getting to walk through that house, because they just came to life and it's just the most colorful, insane vomit cheese thing ever, and I love it. So while we're on a roll here, let's talk about another cheesy, strange, intense, wacky moment for horror, and that is the underrated gem of this year, The Lair of the White Worm. I reviewed this one for 12 Days of Christmas last year, I believe, which is when I get 12 mystery DVDs that I don't even know what they are underneath my tree, and every day I unwrap them and give you a vlog review of the films. Anyway, this film was a trip. I have to admit, I was dreading watching this film because of the front cover, but I was pleasantly surprised with how wacky and fun it was. Another one directed by Ken Russell, The Lair of the White Worm is a 1988 British horror film based on the Bram Stoker novel of the same name. The film is about a Scottish archaeology student that uncovers a strange skull, and not long after, the residents of a nearby town begin to disappear. But there is another film that I really want to talk about from 1988 that is completely underrated, and that is disturbing horror film Pin. This film is about Leon, a boy who becomes obsessed with his imaginary friend who happens to be a really creepy anatomy doll. I don't want to say too much more, but if you're into disturbing, strange films, this one is for you. And now we're here, 1989! Woo! This one is going to be no surprise. It is one of my favorite horror films of all time. I know I've been saying that, but this is like top 3, probably. It's Pet Sematary. This one is based on the book of the same name by Stephen King. The story is about a family that moves into a home that is on sour ground. Something isn't right, and those who die may just return as something else. And sometimes dead is better. I love this film. I know a lot of people find it cheesy, but there's just something charming about the whole story and the doomed family. I love it so much. I prefer the book, believe it or not, but I really love the way it's adapted into this movie. I feel like it is just creepy, and the cast is perfect for the film. As a takeaway and a standalone movie away from the book, I love it. And my underrated gem for this year, I'm gonna end on something that's cheesy and warms my heart so much, and it's Puppet Master. This movie really does have a piece of my heart. I don't know if it's the backstory, the claymation, all the POV shots, but I just love the first Puppet Master movie. The film is about a group of puppets that come to life, each with their own identity and method of killing. In this one, they hunt and terrorize a group of psychics. Puppet Master isn't for everybody, I get it, but if you've ever been interested by the idea of a leech girl, probably check it out. That is my list, guys. Once again, warning, this is my list. Don't be triggered, guys. It's just my own list. It is not the best films of all time. It's just my favorite, and I really wanted to share it with you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe. I do 2 new videos every single week. In fact, this week I did a bonus one. I hope you're all doing well and you're safe at home, and I'll talk to you very soon. Stay spooky. Bye.